Hi, my name is Alex Shelton, and for my changes in the land assignment, I will be doing the 5-minute video. First, I'd like to start off by saying that the indigenous people were very fond of the land around them, and they always kept nature as sustainable as possible, while the Europeans really put a toll on nature and did a lot of things to cause havoc in the land. In front of me right here is a river/creek type of thing, but Europeans would change this land by setting up mills and dams, which would change natural river flows. As for the indigenous people, they would set up fish weirs to catch fish like salmon without depleting the populations. As for deforestation, whenever they changed the land, the Europeans would set up huge projects where they would clear out vast majorities of a forest. And this would lead to soil erosion, habitat loss, and changes in the local climate. Now, the indigenous people were a little bit different. They would change the land by controlled burning, I guess you could call it. And they would clear out an area, burning it, which would give high significant risk to a huge wildfire. But they were more sustainable when it comes to taking out trees. After deforestation, the Europeans domesticated animals like cattle and pigs, which roamed and destroyed native plants. This same livestock would compact the soil and prevent forest regrowth. Another thing Europeans would do is they would take out all these trees right here, and they would bring over new crops like wheat, rye, and apples, and they would plant them in areas like this as a more permanent farming area. See, the indigenous people, whenever they cleared out trees and set up farms, they would rotate from area to area to keep the soil alive and well. Whenever indigenous people would use that controlled burning to take out an area like this, they would clear all the underbrush to make hunting easier and promote the growth of certain plants. And they would take out this area, and basically they only used 3 crops that were good for them, and they would grow them together. They called them the 3 sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. And they were grown together to enrich the soil. They would selectively harvest trees for tools and housing and canoe building without wiping out an entire forest. So the real question is, why would Europeans wipe out forests to set up their cattle and whatnot? It's because the Europeans had such a market-driven economy that it would have lasting effects on New England's landscape because they would wipe out so much stuff. See, indigenous people would wipe out all this underbrush you see in front of me, so it is easier to hunt in the winter. And they would manage animal populations through selective hunting to maintain species numbers. And they hunted deer in specific seasons to allow populations to recover. In the summer, the indigenous people would still wipe out this underbrush, so they relied on hand cultivation because it allowed fields to regenerate. A big difference between Europeans and indigenous people were how they viewed the land. Indigenous people would view the land as a communal resource, while the Europeans, on the other hand, would introduce private land ownership. By dividing land like this into individually owned plots, they imposed fences and permanent settlements, which disrupted the indigenous use of rotating patterns. So the Europeans would give one person 20 acres of plot in this area, and across the creek over there, they would give another person 20 acres of plot. And this would really mess up the indigenous use of rotating their fields whenever they were planting crops. Whenever these indigenous people would take out these trees and plant their crops, they would do so out of respect of their own land. They would harvest their crops with rituals to ensure that overharvesting did not occur. So why would they have so much respect for the land? Well, many indigenous groups saw the land as interconnected and alive spiritually. And in the book, Cronin talks about how indigenous land management was a dynamic system, and the Europeans misunderstood, thinking that the land was unused. Which basically means that the Europeans came in and took out their land, doing whatever they want with it, thinking that the indigenous people didn't care about it, when in fact they did care about it, and that's why it was kept so, or looked so unwell, even though it was kept very well. That pretty much sums up changes in the land, and I will say, This was one of my favorite assignments to make, especially the research part. I enjoyed that a lot. Alex Shelton, signing off.